Hey everyone, it's Tom Kruds. I'm here in the middle of your screen. I'm going to move myself into the corner here in a second. I just wanted to explain why we're looking at the Congressional Budget Office website as Canadians. Typically, whatever the US does when it comes to interest rates and spending will do a little bit better. And what I mean by that is if the US lowers its rates, we're going to lower ours even more. So it's our interest rates. If they spend a lot of money, we're going to spend a lot of money. We've done a good job in the last few years of spending even more money in this country, not in absolute dollars, just as a percentage of our GDP. And the reason that we do all this stuff is Canada typically wants its Canadian dollar to be cheaper or less value than the US dollar. We're an export driven economy, and that's been our game plan for some time. And it's part of the reason that we do these wonderful things with interest rates and spending. And there's, of course, other political reasons, but at a high level, that's what it is. So if we look at the US as Canadians and as real estate investors, it gives us clues as to what might happen here in this country. And the Congressional Budget Office is a great place for these clues. You can see here, they just published their monthly budget review, April 2021. So even though we're in June, that looks like it's the latest one. And from this website, you can get a ton of great budget data. And we just went back through time out of curiosity. So we looked back because we've been staring at this data for a long time. And for Rockstar Inner Circle members, we put this into different presentations and analyzed it and discussed it. And I went back just to 2017 because personally, I always feel that the budget forecasts are underrepresented, under forecasted. They never fully anticipate the amount of spending that they need. And something really interesting happened in the charts, and I want to show that to you. So to do that for context, I just want to show you the 10-year forecast that they published in January 2017 for 2017 to 2027. And if we look at that, I'm sharing the URLs up here, by the way. So if you want to get to any of this data yourself, you can. If you are a bit of a monetary policy geek like Nick and I are, and you want to actually check this stuff out, there are the URLs. So here is the federal debt held by the public as a percentage of gross domestic product. So as a percentage of the GDP, and you can see it was really high here. That was during or right after World War II. And then, it kind of came down. And then you can see we had the financial crisis here, the great financial crisis, and that kind of had it go up, and then it just stayed up. Like this, if you look at this area here that's being forecast to 2025, like this is a lot of spending. Here it kind of came down. Here it doesn't look like it's forecast to come down at all. But what's interesting is if you look at this projection here, you kind of think, well, wow, I guess it went up and it looks like it's going to stay up, and you don't really make anything of it. And this is where I just think the projections are always wrong. So that was the 2017 projection for the next 10 years. And actually here they're not even showing to 2030, but that gives you an idea of what they were forecasting, sorry. And then in 2019, they had an update. So there's the URL if you want to check it out, 2019 to 2029. And then you can see it starting to creep up now. The form of this has changed. If I flip back and you look at the past chart, you can see it's kind of looking like it's drifting up here a little bit, that, the spending, the projections are going up here. And it says relative to the size of the economy, the federal debt in 2019 is projected to be nearly twice its average over the past 50 years. At the end of 2029, debt is projected to reach a higher level than it has at any point since after World War II. So they were expecting at the end of 2029 for it to be higher than, World War II. So here's the World War II. I just want you to use this as a frame of reference because that's the peak, and that's what a lot of different economists will reference when it comes to spending in this country. And then if I flip forward here to 2021, so here's a current one now, 2021 to 2031. So another 10-year forecast. So let's look at the chart now in this 10-year forecast. And I remember being kind of surprised when you look at this kind of stuff because oh, wow, we kind of spiked up. We spiked up from, this was the great financial crisis. And then we spiked up, obviously, because of COVID. And now we're matching. If I just flip back to the last 10-year projection, we were under World War II spending levels as debt as a percentage of GDP. We were under that. So we would have, in the chart, it clearly shows we're under that. But now, just a little while after putting that out, we are clearly in line with World War II. And this is my biggest beef with these projections, is that it never takes into account unexpected events. They never take into account recessions. Like they literally never take into account that anything will be required, anything will happen that requires more spending. So when it does, it's always just like, oh, oops, I guess we made a mistake in our projections and we'll just shoot it way up. And then now, this is what really kind of caught my interest here. It's projected to be like quite flat for the next decade. And I'm like, wait a second. How is it projected to be flat for the next decade? Like completely flat with no further growth. When you see things like this in the headlines, Biden to propose $6 trillion budget to make the US more competitive. And so some of this stuff has already been accounted for, but the spending is clearly politically, it would seem, going to increase further and further and further. So to assume, if I go back to that chart, that it's just kind of going to be flat here, to me, that's being either a little naive or just not taking any political trends into account, because I would think this is not going to stay flat just on the trend of political announcements and different spending bills that are being announced currently. But I have more for you here, and this is kind of what interests us. If I skip ahead here, this is a summary of the 2020 annual reports from the Social Security website in the US, ssa.gov. And if you scroll down on this chart, I think I have it open already. If you scroll down, on this webpage, you see this. And you see Medicare cost and non-interest income by source as a percentage of GDP. And if we look at this closely at the year of 2020, 2021, kind of where we are now, it would look to me that the total cost line here is about to go on a continued massive ramp that increases quite aggressively over the next 10 years. And it seems to me that the difference here in this, the thing that's going up the most to cover these costs would be this area here, which is general revenue transfers. Meaning that this money is just going to kind of come from the government and that it's accounted for, and it's going to have to increase rather aggressively. So then, that kind of gets you thinking of like, how is everything going to stay so flat in some of the Congressional Budget Office charts when you see stuff like this? And then if we look, they came out just recently with the 2021 long-term budget outlook from the Congressional Budget Office. So this kind of obviously gets us super excited. We dive into it, and then you can see this. And it seems now that they're starting to account for some of the stuff. Now remember, do you remember how World War II looked when it came to percentage of GDP, debt as a percentage of GDP? And if I flip back to one of the earlier charts, you can kind of see how World War II looked. It looked like that was the big spike. Now, if I kind of take us forward to the latest one, look at that big spike here, and look what is coming our way. And I know if you're listening to this in Canada, we're not in the US, but when I see a chart like this, meaning that the US is going to have to run these size of deficits, and apparently it stays flat for the next 10 years, I don't think this is going to happen. I think this is being very, very optimistic. But when they ramp like this, and this is their projections, I would think Canada is going to follow this. And if interest rates are going to stay low to be able to afford the interest payments on this debt, then Canada's interest rates are going to stay low, which gives me the confidence and about investing in hard assets. So choose your hard asset of choice. One of ours happens to be income producing real estate. And we're very fortunate in this area, in the Greater Toronto and Golden Horseshoe area, that the population growth here, the demographics that we have here are incredible. There's a Ryerson study that we shared a few weeks ago here on this YouTube channel, which shows that a combination of population growth through immigration and millennials buying is a very interesting demographic mix for real estate in this area, which gives us confidence in income producing hard assets as a place to hide when you see this tidal wave of debt coming through into the economy over the next few years. So this is absolutely astonishing when you see this kind of chart. Like, look at World War II and then look at the amount of debt flowing our way. And then in Canada, just to tie this back to Canada a little bit, the way a lot of this is going to be financed will be similar to the way it was financed through this COVID spending. If I look at the M2 data here in Canada, so this is Canada's money supply. So we just greatly increased our money supply, which basically means we just printed a whole bunch of money and stuffed it into the economy. And I'm generalizing here, but that's what happened here. Look at the increase in our money supply. And the reason that this is really important, as I'm circling this here, as I'm being mesmerized by it myself, if you look at the slope from 2000 to 2010, the money supply increased about at that slope here, if you can see this. And then from 2010 to 2020, it increased at a much higher slope. And now look at the path it's on. I mean, if this continues in any capacity, why would you want to hold any of your savings in dollars as more and more dollars are stuffed into the economy, devaluing all the existing dollars? You just don't want to have any Canadian dollars as any form of savings. You don't want to have really anything other than hard assets, in our opinion. Obviously, dive into this yourself, make your own conclusions. But this is just what we think is going to happen in Canada. And then to tie this back more to Canada, because that's everything I want to show you today in this particular video, just some of those US charts. But if you do want to get into a discussion of Canada, we just did put out a podcast with a great guy. Ben Rabideau is a great analyst here in Canada who collects a lot of the Canadian data around the economy, Canadian housing trends, M2 data, and does an excellent job of breaking it out. We just interviewed him and put a podcast together that we just released this week. So if you want to now dive into the Canadian data, you can find the podcast, the Your Life, Your Term show on Spotify, on any of the Google platforms, on iTunes, of course. And you can find that and listen to it. And that'll kind of dive into the Canadian stuff. So that's everything that we wanted to share with you today. Hopefully you found that useful. It's why we look at the US, because we're looking for clues as to what might happen here in Canada. And when we see that tidal wave of debt coming our way, we think very similar things based on history will be happening in this country. And it's why we want to put ourselves into hard assets, preferably hard assets that produce income, because it's that income that allows you to survive any wild swings in the prices of those hard assets. That's it for this episode. Until next time, your life, your terms.